And a very warm welcome. You're joining us here at Hydepark on Other Derana 24 tonight. And here we will be talking about Sri Lanka's relations with the Netherlands, especially with recent developments in terms of the Netherlands returning colonial artifacts to the country, beginning an initiative that sets an example to the rest of the world with returning some of the artifacts that were taken away from not just Sri Lanka, but other countries as well during their dominion of such countries. And we will be talking about how Sri Lanka and the Netherlands can improve trade, investments and other areas, especially that the Dutch embassy is working in here in Sri Lanka. And we have the pleasure of hosting the ambassador of the Netherlands to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, Her Excellency Bonnie Horbach. A very warm welcome to you. And Ayubowan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for taking the time to be here at Hydepark. It's interesting how you've traveled to Sri Lanka during a deep economic crisis, taken over your role as a diplomat back in 2022 when Sri Lanka was grappling some of the difficult times. But you have initiated some interesting and very important campaigns, initiatives here in Sri Lanka to promote, I believe, what you're passionate about as well and what the Netherlands is working with. I'd like to start off there. 16 days of activism, Orange the World, the global campaign to end violence against women, and you're championing it here in Sri Lanka together with other embassies. Let's start off there. Why you're so passionate about it?
Well, first of all, I'm a female myself, so it affects me, and it affected me and my career over my entire life. And it's not only something that I'm passionate about here in Sri Lanka. I've been passionate about it in all the places I've been based throughout my career. And what I think is important is that we sometimes forget that 50% of the population is female. And so if we lose out of the capacity and intelligence and the productivity of those females, we lose out as a country, but also as the world. So that's why I'm very passionate about making sure that we focus these 16 days on how we can eliminate violence against women and girls, because they are faced with this violence more frequently than men are in our societies. I'm a female myself. I'm a single mom. I have a 15-year-old daughter, beautiful girl, but I want the best for her. And I think all fathers and all mothers want the best for their girls and their boys. And sometimes we forget that females and girls are faced with other challenges than boys are.
Do you think females and girls here in Sri Lanka face more challenges than in your country?
It's hard to say. I think worldwide 1 out of 3 females face violence in their lifetime. That's a staggering amount of females that have to deal with these issues. And so it doesn't only, it's not only in Asia or in Africa or in other parts of the world, it's also in the Netherlands and in Europe. So we should not close our eyes for the challenges that women face in the Netherlands as well. But I think, especially if we look at Sri Lanka, domestic violence is still an issue that a lot of women have to deal with during their lifetimes. And maybe we could learn from each other and help each other to keep our women and girls safe. Because I also think that females have a lot to offer a country. I can see it in our foreign office, for example, in the place where I work, that there are more females now than there were maybe 20 years ago. Gives another perspective to the same policies. And those perspectives are important, I believe. With regards to Sri Lanka, we've seen that a lot of women and girls faced difficult times during the pandemic, but also in the aftermath of the economic and financial crisis. We should not close our eyes for those difficulties, and make sure that that they are safe in their workspaces, in their homes, and in the streets. So I think that is important to work on.
Something that I'm interested to talk about also is about you being a single mother. You have a 15-year-old girl, a teenager who you've raised not just here, but you travel the world raising a girl as she grows, and I believe you'll be back in the Netherlands too for some time. With all that, what challenges do you think you face as a mother, as a woman, a professional, as a diplomat?
Yeah. Well, I don't think, I will say something really strange, that women have probably 2 or 3 jobs. They have their normal job, the job that pays them, but I also have a job when I come home as a mom, cleaning. So we have multiple tasks to deliver during the day, during the week, during the year. I have the same issues and challenges with my daughter. I think what I see, for example, that I'm often asked, you know, how do you deal with your daughter because you're a single mom? I've never heard a male diplomat or ambassador asked, you know, how do you deal with your children because you work? And so I think there still is a higher expectations of women to play a role not only in the workspace but also at home, and I love it. So I don't mind, of course, trying to make the best for my daughter, to set the best example for my daughter, that she can see that she can achieve whatever she wants to achieve. But it puts an extra layer of pressure on most women, and not only me, but I think every woman that I will talk to will say the same things. We have multiple tasks that we have to deliver. For my daughter here in Sri Lanka, she loves it. It's a very nice place to be. But she also sometimes complains that if she is in Gold Phase 1 or in any other shopping center, that there's lots of catcalling going on. And I also heard from women that I speak to that use the public transportation that it's not always safe. And those are areas that we should all stand around our women and our girls to make sure that they have the same safety in public spaces as our men do. Because if you're not safe, how can you then achieve the best of yourself? Because you're constantly navigating an unsafe space. And I think we don't forget as women that this takes place, but I think men have never experienced how we have to navigate the public spaces. And if we try to tell them how it feels, they become our best partners. They become our saviors. They become the people that will stand next, before and behind us to ensure that we can achieve what we want to achieve.
Certainly, and in Sri Lanka, we've made some progress in terms of political representations. You've spoken about that as well. Yeah. In the Netherlands, how women hold, you mentioned, significant leadership roles as well. How can we draw comparison, learn from and improve here in Sri Lanka to move ahead, to use this as a stepping stone and move ahead to ensuring that women are safe, girls are safe, whether at home or in public places?
Yeah. We can look at one another and see how we can learn from each other. But I think what is also important that we talk to one another, because there's an extra layer of unsafety for women if we look at social media and what's happening on the internet. Women seem to be targeted more than men are in those spaces. What I think is very valuable, and we have, as an embassy, have also tried to support these initiatives of creating more awareness and capacity amongst local female politicians. allowing them to be in the space, also lifting them up, trying to discuss with them what they want to achieve, and seeing how we can, as an embassy, with our programs, with local NGOs, help them to build the capacity to play a role not only in local government but also in provincial and in national government. We've seen considerable progress during the last elections. I believe you went from 11 females to almost 22 women in parliament, and that is a considerable progress, and hopefully we can continue that progress, because the more variety we have in decision making, the better the decision making will be, because women take something else to the table than men do. It's not bad or better or worse. It's about looking at a different way at the same policies and ensuring that everybody will benefit from the policy that are being made in Parliament.
Any specific policies you can share with us? Especially the Netherlands is advocating for women's political participation internationally, and there must be policies that have been implemented, continued, regardless of government change there in the Netherlands as well. We can learn from and implement, and maybe you've been working here in Sri Lanka, you understand the system here somewhat.
Yeah, well, I think one of the policies that is helping the Netherlands a lot, and especially in the promotion of careers for women, is the fact that there's childcare near the workspaces that we have, so that you don't rely on your family or your parents to take care of your children, but you can continue your career because your children are safe in childcare. I think that has helped me tremendously when I was still working in the Netherlands, is that, you know, and of course your mother heart breaks a little bit also when you bring your child to childcare. But for my daughter, it was so much fun. She got to play with other children, and so she loved it. And for me, it was a possibility to continue my career and not sit at home.
With the Orange the World 16 days of activism, if you can talk a little about that as well. What do you think Sri Lanka can do during this period that continues beyond these 16 days of activism to unite and rally around protecting the rights of women and ending violence against women?
Yeah, 16 days is not enough. We have seen that. And these 16 days actually is just a way of really putting some attention to the issue of violence against women and girls. It is a 365-day campaign that we should embark on. 365 days of women, girls and men and boys rallying together to stop violence against women and girls, because they are more vulnerable than most men are. We see there is a prevalence of violence against women and girls in the workspace, at home, in buses, in the public spaces, and I would not like to exclude the men and not see the men only as the perpetrators, but also as the ones that can ensure that women stay safe. Without the men in my environment, without colleagues, I would not have achieved what I achieve now, because they also make sure that my workspace is safe.
Certainly. What about a feminist foreign policy? We read about the Netherlands talking about a feminist foreign policy. What does it feel like to have such policy?
Yeah, you know, we always develop these new forms of policy, but basically what it means is that whatever we do, we also look from a gender perspective, a gender lens to the policies and the relations that we build. So we make sure that everything we do, we also include the female side of the coin. And sometimes in international relations, It is, in the past it was a male-dominated arena. And so the male-dominated priorities also came to the fore. Nowadays what we do is look at the broad scala of different relationships we have and include more specifically also the female and the women's role in it.
Are there any examples that you can share where this policy has been really implemented?
It's very good to look at, so we do it on every different level. But for example, if we look at exchanges or receptions, we always make sure that we have a broad representation of society that we include in our invitation policies. But also if we look at, for example, our international or our bilateral relations, we just pinpoint, okay, what does this mean for females? What does it mean for women in this country? What does it mean for women in the Netherlands? Have we thought about it? And sometimes it's just, we see that we have included it, and sometimes we see that we have not included it enough.
And how difficult it is, and how does the Netherlands navigate your policy, especially when you work with and influence diplomatic relations with countries that have different or differing views on gender equality and equal rights?
Well, funny enough, it's not so difficult because every country, in every country, 50% of the population is female. Are women, are girls, and you cannot just exclude that part of your population. It will be silly to do, economically also not very beneficial, because you need the productivity of women as well. So I think in most countries it is a very easy discussion to be had. And everybody does it in their own way, and it's not like we know it all. I sometimes also really learn from the Sri Lankan way of doing things. For example, how you ensure that when your parents get elderly, that you take them in the house. That's something that is very uncommon in the Netherlands, but it's so beautiful. And so I find it sometimes difficult to say what you can learn from us, but it's what we can learn from each other.
Certainly. Also interested, I feel like we're talking a lot about female feminist rights. Yeah. We've promised to talk about relations as well, but this is an urgent topic of interest, and you're championing this, so there's no one better to talk about this as well. We spoke about feminist foreign policy, but again, in terms of how the Netherlands' feminist foreign policy has been impactful in addressing gender-based violence and inequality. That, I think, is interesting also to talk about. Something interesting is that the Netherlands talks about equal rights. Yeah. Here we say women's rights, equal rights, but there's a larger spectrum also. Rights to all, for all those who are differently abled, women challenged, young boys, girls. So how do you really look at this in...
sometimes we pretend as if our societies are based on males and females, but the coloring is so much broader than only males and females. We have young boys, older boys, men, older men. We have women, young girls. We have people from the LGBTIQ environment. So there is a whole broad scala of different people. All these people, all of them, whether they are able, disabled, whether they are male, female, whether they are lesbian or homosexual, they are all part of our society. And we should all include them. And we should all make sure that they are part and parcel of what we represent as a society. And I've seen in the past 2.5 years that I've been here, huge progress also in Sri Lanka, in how Sri Lanka is dealing with the LGBTIQ community. And I applaud that progress, because I think it is important that everybody in society can participate.
You visited Sri Lanka. You took up your role as a diplomat here in Sri Lanka back in July 2022, as I mentioned previously. You've seen it all here in Sri Lanka, basically. We went through a difficult time, plunged into crisis, saw queues with no end, and shortage of items. And here you are seeing a political change as well. And you mentioned how significantly Sri Lanka has improved representation of women. Not just that, we have the first differently abled parliamentarian in the country as well. So with all this, let's maybe revisit your first day in office here in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I can still remember when I came. Some of the supermarkets, they were not stocked up. There was very little to buy. We had a QR code to get our petrol for in the cars, so we had to be very careful how far we would drive and where we would go to. And still everything was functioning. It's also the resilience and ingenuity of the people that they were able to establish systems so quickly to allow the country to continue. It also is a testament of the people of Sri Lanka that they are where they are right now, going through these difficult times. And not everybody has been impacted the same way, but a lot of people have been impacted. And they still continue every single day. And I find it amazing. And I'm very, very proud to be an ambassador to Sri Lanka because of what the people of Sri Lanka have showed us they can do. They can have a transfer of power in a peaceful manner. They continue working every single day and ensuring that their children can go to school, and everything is functioning still. And of course there are stresses on society, but if you see where you are now in comparison to 2.5 years ago, you must admit that you made huge steps forward. That's not to say that you're there yet. There are challenges ahead of you, but I'm actually quite optimistic about Sri Lanka. I think Sri Lanka can be an example in the region, and maybe even in the world, of what they are doing right now and how they are trying to set new systems in place that will be equal, that will be fair to everybody, and that will be just. And of course, it's this new government has a huge challenge in front of it, and some of the systems and structures that were put in place in the last decades and maybe centuries, it will be difficult to dismantle them and to rectify them, and so we have to give them some time. But I'm looking with an open view to what hopefully they will do, because it will not only benefit Sri Lanka, it will also benefit our bilateral relationships. And maybe I can jump a little bit towards our trade relations and our investment relationship. I see over the past 2.5 years some of our investors going away from Sri Lanka and going back to the Netherlands because they find it a little bit tricky to invest in Sri Lanka because of an uncertain investment climate, an uncertain rule of law climate. And if that is rectified, I definitely see some of these companies returning. But you need to have transparency, rule of law, ease of doing business. And then Sri Lanka has everything to offer, not only to countries in the region, but also countries like the Netherlands.
I think you've spoken about trade, investment, and the Sri Lanka's potential as a tourism destination here as well. We have so much to offer. It's interesting to talk about your candid explanation of Sri Lanka's situation, how Netherlands investors were rather discouraged from staying in Sri Lanka. Did this largely stem from the political situation in the country, or is it bottlenecks in the system, red tape, and several months to have projects approved?
I think it's both, and I won't, you know, the Dutch are known for their bluntness, so I will be very blunt. And it also has to do with corruption and those things. Dutch companies, when they do business abroad, they are not only judged in the country where they do business, but they're also judged in our own country. So they are not allowed to have bribes. They need to have a transparency of the supply chain. They have to make sure that the people in their companies are treated well. And not only according to the law of the country where they are based and invested, but also in the Netherlands itself. So it is good to know that if these things are being improved, it will be easier for Dutch companies to put their money also in countries like Sri Lanka, because those investments are still real investments and you want return of investment. So yes, it had to do with the political situation, but definitely also with ease of doing business, transparency, red tape. And if those things can be resolved, I see Dutch companies returning as well. Yes.
About these policy changes you're talking about, you work with lawmakers, you're in constant touch with leaders, opinion makers in Sri Lanka. Have you advocated for policy changes or tried to maybe work on certain areas that you feel even the Dutch government is interested in improving here in Sri Lanka?
Well, I definitely will tell them very, very openly what I think the bottlenecks are. And we have been talking with decision makers in country about how we can assist, how we can help Sri Lanka, especially learn from the mistakes we made in our development, because every country makes mistakes. So let's not make the mistakes of the Dutch and improve the country in a better way and maybe leapfrog certain developments. So yes, we are in constant discussion, and the relations are very strong between the Netherlands and Sri Lanka. And I feel, and I've always felt, very welcome, but also very open to talk about these things. And that makes being in Sri Lanka a very nice place to be as an ambassador.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that. And also, as an ambassador, what's your day like? Since you mentioned it's interesting to be here in Sri Lanka, what do you really do?
What I really do during the day? Well, of course we have loads of meetings, and there is also a very busy evening program with a lot of, because you have quite a few international organizations and other embassies and high commissioners based here. So we meet each other, we talk with one another, we talk with Sri Lankans. I have interesting talks with think tanks, with academia, and for our embassy, one of the main points and main priorities was the return of artifacts, which of course was a huge achievement from both sides. When I started as Consul General in Cape Town, almost more than 10 years ago, discussing the return of artifacts was really not on the agenda yet. And now 10 years later, we have returned 6 objects that were stolen during the colonial times. And I'm extremely proud that we managed to do this. But what is more important than returning the artifacts, which is very important, is also looking at our past and revisiting the narrative and researching that narrative and establishing a new narrative, a new past almost, in which we have a clearer view of our role as the Dutch, as a colonial power in Sri Lanka, what we, the bad things we done, but also the good things that happened here. And I've seen that Sri Lankans are very gentle and kind with regards to our shared past. But I think it's also good to look at it and see how we can have a more realistic view of that past. And maybe, and what, you know, as a historian, I think it's so important to revisit that past, because only then we can establish the frameworks of an equal and just and equitable future. If we know the mistakes that we made in the past, but also don't, you know, try to brush it away. It is something that is important.
Is this a shared belief, sentiment of the Dutch people and the government?
It is a constant discussion. Not everybody agrees. That makes the discussion also so lively and interesting. And the same goes for Sri Lanka. When I first arrived, everybody said, "Oh no, don't talk about it. It's you're the nicer colonial power." We still were colonial powers, and we still, you know, looted your artifacts. Those artifacts were in our state collection for a long time. It was about time that those were returned. And it's not a gesture, and that I find very interesting of how we manage it as Dutch people. It's not a gesture. It is a law in the Netherlands that we need to return artifacts that were stolen to the rightful owners. So it's a right. But with it is also a huge program of exchange, of technical assistance, of deliberations, of researchers working together on the past. We have a huge program with the University of Colombo and the Netherlands looking at certain legal aspects of the return of artifacts. We are embarking on a research program with the National Archives to see how we can work together on the archives, because there's also still some archives in the Netherlands. And those discussions, those collaborations also strengthen the ties between Sri Lanka and the Netherlands. It's something that we will have and no other country will have between us. And I find that's so important. So those are the people-to-people relations that will help us to also strengthen the relations in the areas of trade, of economy, of tourism, because we start to understand each other a little bit better and we're closer to one another.
I think it's time we take a short break here at Hydepark. We'll return to the conversation. We are in discussion with the ambassador of the Netherlands here in Sri Lanka, Bonnie Horbach, who was talking about the Netherlands. And we've dedicated most of the time during our first half for rights of women and protecting and eliminating dangers faced by women in society. We'll return after this short break. To stay with us. Welcome back. You are joining us here at Hydepark, and we're in conversation with the ambassador of the Netherlands in Sri Lanka, Bonnie Horbach. Excellency, you were talking about the Netherlands' initiative to return some of the stolen artifacts during colonial time. A significant and important item was the Leuke cannon, a golden royal Kastani, and a lot of other items. But there was discussion about flora and fauna and sharing of knowledge, especially those that Sri Lanka now does not have this knowledge anymore, or maybe only has a significantly less access to that kind of knowledge, but the Netherlands have all these in archives maybe. So in transferring them the know-how and constant observation and monitoring of how they are taken care of here in Sri Lanka, how will that be improved?
Well, first of all, I think you should be very proud of your museums and your museum experts, because most of them are so enthusiastic and passionate about their jobs, and have a high quality. What we have been doing is we have been trying to set up exchange programs for master students from Sri Lanka to go to the Netherlands and study museology in the Netherlands. We now have 5 students that are in the Netherlands. And when they return, hopefully their knowledge and their expertise and everything they have learned, they can share with their colleagues in the museums. So that is one of the programs that came out of the return of these artifacts. It's also not entirely true that that we know more about the items than you do. Funny enough, when we were doing the research on these objects, it was a joint research team with Dutch and Sri Lankan researchers, and they researched the items that were about to be returned, where they were coming from, how they were produced, what the background was of these items. And some of these items we could never even, we have state-of-the-art museums. These items were in our Rijksmuseum, the largest museum in the Netherlands. But the knowledge and the know-how that Sri Lankan researchers had to tell us about how, for example, metalwork was made on the Leuki cannon, that we never knew. So it's unbelievable the knowledge that we actually gain if we work together on these items. So we might have more technical capability, but the knowledge that the Sri Lankans have about their own objects is much higher than what we have. Another example that I can give you is that we have these palm leaf manuscripts that were also probably stolen from Sri Lanka. And when we first had Sri Lankan researchers come to the Netherlands, they told us that the way that we were keeping them, even we were thinking that we were keeping them under the right conditions, but the way we were keeping them was not the right way, that they should be, that oil should be put on them, and that even that if you put oil with some blackness, some in it, that you can actually see the letters and the scripts. And those things we didn't know. So here you see that 1 + 1 is actually 3. And that we need to work together on these items. And I think it's important also to know, because when I first started on these, the return of these artifacts, and it was started already far before I arrived, people told me, oh, we just keep those items in the Netherlands because they're so nicely put in the Rijksmuseum. But I think it's also good for the Sri Lankan population to be able to see them, to look at them, to know the stories, to be told those stories. And not everybody has the opportunity to go to the Netherlands. And for me, it's also a very nice way of telling Dutch tourists, you know, where you need to go is to the National Museum in Colombo. Often tourists go straight to the beach and leave Colombo for what it is. But I said, no, you have to go, you have to see these items in the National Museum. And if you're there, then please also look at all the other things, because the civilization and Sri Lanka started far before we ever arrived. There was a whole kingdom before Christ, and we think that everything starts when the Dutch came, but that's not the case. So I think it's important to tell these stories, to have these exchanges, and to also look at the value of the items that we have returned, but also at the technical complexities these items were made with. The metalwork is outstanding. I think the Rijksmuseum had all kinds of, they tried to do all kinds of research, but never understood how the metalwork was made on the Leeuwke cannon. Those metalworkers still exist in Sri Lanka. The craftsmanship that was used to make these items still exists in Sri Lanka.
Do you think collaboration with Dutch universities and the Sri Lankan archaeology department to other archives will really help promote these communities, the kind of work, and also take this heritage to the rest of the world?
Absolutely. I'm completely convinced. It's one of the things that I'm most passionate about, and my colleagues at the embassy also have taken this forward. We're trying to establish, for example, relations between the Dutch ceramic community and the Sri Lankan ceramic community because of the craftsmanship, and we are trying to do the same in several other fields as well. And it's not only looking back on how things were made in the past, but also how this craftsmanship can be cherished and safeguarded, because the craftsmanship here is much nicer than some of the plastic things that we now seem to buy. And what I did as in the embassy together with my colleagues was to invite a Sri Lankan master potter to come up with, and I'm actually, next time I will give it to you, to come up with a business gift that symbolizes our shared past, but also our shared future. And if you then see what this master potter made, then you can see that this craftsmanship is still there, and we should try to build on that.
You talk about a shared past. There is sufficient Dutch heritage, remnants of the colonial history here in Sri Lanka, not just at the museum in Colombo, but wherever, the buildings to architecture to the coastal areas. And you're talking about a shared future. It's interesting to talk about it. Where do you think trade relations will go from here? Because we saw Sri Lankan exports slightly plunged during the past, and investments, you mentioned that there has been a slight deterrence given the political situation, or whether it's the corruption or red tape. But what areas, again, in terms of investment, do you foresee Dutch companies coming into Sri Lanka for?
I think even though there is a small dip in our trade relations, we are still the 7th trade partner of Sri Lanka. So let's not underestimate our relations with Sri Lanka. And the EU as a whole is still the first trading partner of Sri Lanka. So, and we are part of the EU, and as the European Union is such an important partner of Sri Lanka, we should look at where Sri Lanka can really play a role of significance. It's a relatively small island, almost, I think, a little bit bigger than the Netherlands, with 22 million citizens. So it's not a huge island, but what Sri Lanka has done over the years very well is that its social sector and social standards are very good. And that's what the EU and the Netherlands specifically are looking at. How of course we want to do business the cheapest way possible, but we're also focusing on how people are being treated in the supply chain, how you deal with your environmental standards, what you're doing with regards to environmental degradation of your country. And there, I think Sri Lanka is doing a lot better than its neighbors, and it will become a focus of the Netherlands as well. We want to have good products flowing into the Netherlands, and for those products we are happy to pay a little bit more, as long as we know what the supply chain, how it is organized. To give you one good example is Celine Textiles. They have introduced the blockchain into their textiles, so that In the Netherlands, you can actually see how much a weaver is making, how much water is being used in the supply chain, what the logistics is costing. And I think we're heading into that direction. And if Sri Lanka is able and willing to be a little bit in front of other countries in the region, it will actually have a competitive advantage. Even though it seems it is more expensive, it will help you to sell your products for a higher price and for a higher value of the people of Sri Lanka, and not have a race to the bottom. Because if your products are getting cheaper, most of the time it's the people at the end of the chain that are suffering, not the middleman and not the people that trade the products.
Certainly. I'd like to maybe touch upon a few other areas before we wrap up. The Netherlands, a major seafaring nation in the past, and of course here we are in Sri Lanka now talking about maritime security, the Indian Ocean, the threats faced here in Sri Lanka. The question is why the Netherlands considers maritime security and rule-based order in the Indian Ocean as important, and how can we really look at with maybe regional power play and Sri Lanka, an important place, a landmark, a country in the maritime routes, geographically important. How can we really put our security first here?
Yeah, well, that's a huge, I think, a huge challenge Sri Lanka has, because I think you have more sea and ocean than you have land. And almost 80% of all freight goes past Sri Lanka. It is not only the geopolitical influencing in that ocean, but also the risk if something goes wrong. Sri Lanka is directly affected. Suppose you have an oil tanker that capsizes. It will be Sri Lanka's shores that will be affected. It will be Sri Lanka's tourism that will be affected. So you have to make sure that those trade routes that are extremely important and also benefit Sri Lanka are safe and secure, and that everybody abides by the rules of the game. We, as the Netherlands, we are huge traders in the past and still today. So for us, it's also important that those trade routes, that the rules are applied to everybody, and that there are no shortcuts. So it's not only security, but it's also the safety that is important of these trade routes.
Tourism. I believe you are an avid traveler here in Sri Lanka as well.
Yeah.
Do you think tourists are safe now in Sri Lanka? Because this has been a major topic during the past few months. Sri Lanka's industry plunged into crisis during the Easter Sunday attacks, the COVID crisis as well, the pandemic's prolonged shutdowns, but Sri Lanka has been resilient to come back stronger. But here we are talking about, optimistically talking about the future. What areas do you think we can look at, and maybe the Dutch tourists will be more interested in?
Well, I think the Dutch tourists are coming in masses at the moment. They are very interested in places like Sri Lanka that have so much to offer. It's not only the sea and the ocean, it's the mountains, it's the culture. It's not only the Dutch culture, it's also the old ancient culture of Sri Lanka. I myself, I'm hugely fascinated by the water tanks and the irrigation system that was set up long before the Dutch ever came. Something that I think should be advertised more often, because it's like it's in my view the Sri Lankan pyramids, because it's unbelievable how they were made at that time and how specifically they were made. So that's one of my fascinations. But I think Sri Lanka is one of the safest places to travel to. It's one of the nicest places to travel to. What I do hope is that you don't go for quick short-term wins and quantity, but you also will continue to focus on quality, the quality of tourism, so that people will return and not come one time, but will see the beauty of the country and say, I want to explore more. So that means that you need a national policy and strategy on tourism and how to attract tourists, not only to come once, but to come and return constantly. I am traveling over Christmas in Sri Lanka. I have friends from South Africa coming. In March, I have friends from Denmark coming. So I see that my popularity has gone up amongst my friends since I've been based in Sri Lanka because of its tourism destination.
And you travel often here?
Absolutely, and also to the north, which is beautiful as
certainly,
well. Yes.
Certainly. But we don't have much time here. I'm told the producer keeps telling me that's enough. But okay. Yes, finally, I believe you'll be working on more projects here in Sri Lanka, just as you are working on women's rights and promoting a rule-based economy, talking about corruption, eliminating corruption here in Sri Lanka. While you travel Sri Lanka and while you do your day job as a diplomat, what's your message to the Sri Lankan people and also our lawmakers?
That's a difficult question. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Sri Lankan people for inviting me in, receiving me with such a warm heart, all the smiles that you get. I would like to really tell them that Sri Lanka is on the right path. It will take some time. And it will be probably a hard journey for some. But I think you should continue on the path that you are on, and hopefully we will strengthen our relationships. And maybe before we close off, and maybe I should have told you before, but we have a very nice exhibition coming in January called the World Press Photo. It's an international exhibition that will be coming to Sri Lanka and will be based in Colombo, Jaffna and Galle. And hopefully a lot of people will come and have a look.
This is for, what are the days and for how long would that be?
It starts on the 10th of January and it will continue until the beginning of February. And it's all the world press photos gathered in huge exhibitions. It's a free exhibition for all to look at from Sri Lanka at the rest of the world and what has happened over the past year.
And we look forward to talking about that as January approaches. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your time here at Hydepark. Truly fascinating to talk about the Netherlands and Sri Lanka, and especially your work here in Sri Lanka, what you're passionate about. So I really hope that your efforts will bring us a better, equal world, not just in Sri Lanka, but we achieve more rights for women and children, as well as others who are differently abled.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ambassador. We were in conversation with the Ambassador of the Netherlands here in Sri Lanka, Bonnie Horbach, who was previously the Dutch Ambassador in Lithuania and has worked in South Africa and the Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, spokesperson to the Minister of European Affairs, and also worked in countries like Thailand and in Baghdad as well. We'll see you again next week with yet another discussion here at Hydepark. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.